This is the brief on Satoshi Kon's psychological anime masterpiece, Perfect Blue. Okay, so ever seen a movie that felt way ahead of its time? Well, this 1997 anime thriller totally nails it. It follows a former J-pop idol, Mima Kirigoi, and honestly, it's this critique of celebrity culture and, losing your identity that feels even more relevant now. First, the whole story kicks off with Mima's massive mental crisis when she tries to switch from singing to acting. She starts getting these darker roles, right? And she just completely loses her grip on what's real versus what's part of the show. It's intense. And she's haunted constantly by this hallucination like the ghost of her old, pure idol self. People call it virtual Mima. Super creepy. Second, the movie is just prophetic about today's celebrity scene. You see the industry pushing Mima into these really exploitative situations. And this just fuels the crazy delusions of some fans, especially this stalker guy, Me-Mania, who's obsessed with her pure image. It even showed way back then how the internet through this fan blog, Mima's Room, could be used to control and twist her image. Pretty scary stuff. Finally, the artistry here is just incredible. The director, Kon, uses visuals like reflections everywhere to show Mima's fractured self, public versus private. And its influence? Huge. Even reached Hollywood. Director Darren Aronofsky basically said it inspired Black Swan, and he even directly remade Perfect Blue's famous bathtub scene in Requiem for a Dream. Yeah, that scene. It's this really potent, visual thriller, a stunning look at fame, identity, and the whole online image thing that feels absolutely essential today.
Welcome back. Today we're diving into a major research paper looking at anime and otaku culture, specifically tracking that relationship across reality and representation from Astro Boy right up to 2.5D.
Yeah, that's a really ambitious piece. Very theoretical, very strong analysis across the case studies.
It is. The grasp of theory is impressive, connecting economics, culture, film analysis. It's clear there's deep expertise here.
Definitely. But with case studies spanning such a long period, like 60 years, the structure holding it all together really needs to be crystal clear.
Exactly. And that brings us straight to our first point, which is about strengthening that central idea, the Otaku Evolution.
Okay.
The paper's coherence could be, significantly boosted if that evolutionary framework was defined more explicitly, right up front, instead of sort of letting the case studies imply the connections.
I see what you mean. The intro lays out the cases. Astro Boy, Perfect Blue, the newer stuff, clearly enough. But the link between them? The evolutionary drivers?
It's a bit too implicit right now. How do we get from, say, the economic choices in the 60s with Astro Boy to the really intense psychological stuff in Perfect Blue?
Right. The reader kind of has to piece that together themselves, which, takes effort away from the actual analysis.
Precisely. We want them focused on your complex arguments, not trying to figure out the roadmap.
But is there a risk there? If we make the structure too neat, do we lose some of the nuance, the complexity of how these things actually developed?
That's a fair point. But the goal isn't to simplify the theory itself, just to clarify the journey through the theory.
Okay.
So the suggestion is to introduce a clearer definition of otaku evolution right there in the introduction. Maybe think about it in multiple dimensions.
Dimensions? How so?
Well, you could categorize the main driver you're exploring in each case study. Give the reader that structural map immediately.
Ah, okay. So it's more like a signpost, not flattening the ideas.
Exactly. We were thinking you could maybe structure it into phases. For example, Phase 1 could explicitly focus on the economic and aesthetic drivers.
Right, that's clearly where Astro Boy fits with the whole Astro Boy economy and the limited animation techniques.
Perfect. Then, Phase 2 could shift perhaps to the psychological and identity drivers.
Which is where Perfect Blue comes in, with its exploration of identity crisis, superflat theory, the whole fan relationship thing. Makes sense.
And then maybe a Phase 3 focusing on, say, embodied and production drivers. That could cover the move towards fan creation, 2.5D, virtual bodies.
Yeah, that framework really clarifies the why you're moving from Tezuka's animation constraints to Mima's psychological breakdown. It makes the leap feel logical, because the reader understands the type of evolution being tracked.
It keeps the focus on the driver, not just the artifact.
Okay, so if that clarifies the why, let's talk about the how, especially in that first case study, the Astro Boy section.
Okay, yeah, that part on the Astro Boy economy is really thorough. Lots on spectator investment, circulation, film theory, very rigorous. Necessary for an MRP, for sure.
Absolutely, its strength. But to really hook the reader immediately in case study 1, we think that Den's theory about the economy needs to be anchored more directly right away in the aesthetics, the visual side of things.
Ah, I see the potential weakness. Right now it sort of leads with the academic concepts, Metz, Lyotard, Steinberg, before fully grounding it in the visual reality. The static images, the merchandise.
Exactly. You're giving us the system before the problem the system solved. We understand why the theory's there, but it slows down the initial flow a bit. We need to see why these big theories matter to this cartoon robot, like immediately.
So the suggestion is flip the emphasis?
Basically, yeah. Start with the tangible aesthetic issue, Tezuka's need for low-cost, limited animation. Show the problem first.
Okay, like focus on the actual techniques, using one image over 3 frames, those still shots in reaction sequences, the things they had to do.
Precisely. Explain how that production necessity created this surplus of static, immobile images.
Which then, almost by accident, were perfect for merchandise. Like those Meiji chocolate stickers you mentioned, cheap, easy to reproduce.
Right. And then the Astro Boy economy comes in as the brilliant system that leverages those aesthetically necessary static images for funding and circulation.
Ah, okay. So the theory then feels justified because it's directly explaining the mechanism behind this visual and economic solution.
Exactly. It connects the dots immediately. Problem, system theory. It just sharpens the entry point into that crucial first case.
Makes sense. It grounds the whole argument right from the start.
And speaking of sharpness, that brings us to the conclusion. Because the sharpness you achieve elsewhere, especially with the Perfect Blue analysis, needs to fully power the final takeaway.
The Perfect Blue section. Yeah, that analysis felt really strong. Connecting Mima's identity crisis to celebrity culture, and especially how it predicted the anxieties of early internet life.
It's brilliant, that connection. How Mima Mania and even Mima herself start believing the fake blog, Mima's Room. It feels terrifyingly relevant today.
It really does. It elevates the whole discussion.
Absolutely. It turns what could be seen as a niche study into something much broader. But, and here's the opportunity, the paper's really powerful findings there, especially around that prophetic horror, need to be leveraged much more strongly in the conclusion to give it that resonant so what.
Okay. The conclusion does recap the evolution well enough, but it adds a little abstractly, something about providing a further understanding of this aspect of humanity.
Right. It feels like a slight retreat after the very specific high-impact analysis of the film, especially when you've brought in such rich context. The fears about internet isolation, Japan's lost decade, the hikikomori issue.
So the final argument maybe lacks a bit of punch compared to the evidence presented earlier?
We think so. It needs to anchor back firmly into that contemporary relevance. Use the Perfect Blue analysis as the definitive lens on digital life now.
Okay, so the suggestion is really synthesize that identity crisis point. Mima struggling with the gap between her real self and the online image?
Yes, connect that explicitly to why the film feels, as you observe, now more relevant than it was upon its release.
That struggle is basically universal now, right? Everyone curates an online self on social media. That gap between the curated image and messy reality.
Exactly. That's the key insight. Frame Mima's struggle not just as an otaku or celebrity issue, but as the prototype for the digital anxiety everyone faces today.
So you argue that the Otaku Evolution, this deep dive into navigating reality and representation, actually gives us a unique framework for understanding this universal modern condition.
Precisely. Connect the isolation, the fake personas, the blurring lines documented in the film directly to today's online experience. That transforms the specialized critique into a broad, powerful statement about self-perception in the digital age.
That really lands the significance, doesn't it? It answers the so what, loud and clear. Okay, I see how that elevates the entire paper's impact.
Definitely. Look, this is exceptionally strong work already. These are really just adjustments to sharpen the structure and maximize the impact of your best insights.
So, to recap quickly, 3 main areas. First, nail down that Otaku Evolution framework right in the intro. Use clear phases or dimensions like economic aesthetic, psychological identity, embodied production to really guide the reader.
Got it. Second, for the Astro Boy section, anchor the theory in the aesthetics. Start with the visual problem of limited animation, the static images, and then introduce the economy and theory as a solution. Visuals first.
Right. And finally, in the conclusion, really leverage that incredible perfect blue analysis. Connect Mima's crisis and the reality representation spectrum directly to contemporary digital life and identity anxiety. Make that the powerful takeaway. Excellent. Those are really actionable suggestions. Implement those, and this paper will be even more impactful. We'd certainly invite you to submit the revised version for another look.
Welcome to the debate. Today we're diving back into, well, a landmark of psychological horror, Satoshi Kon's 1997 film Perfect Blue. It follows Mima Kirigoi, a former pop idol trying to shift into serious acting. But this career change, it triggers a really terrifying spiral into delusion, made worse by stalking and just the immense pressure of her public image.
Yeah, it's absolutely still one of the most, intellectually gripping animated films out there. Everyone praises its visual style, the editing, the way it disorients you. But the debate that keeps coming up is this. Does the film's main punch come from its very sharp, very specific critique of how female identity gets twisted by celebrity culture and exploitation?
Oris, is its real genius in something else? Is it that radical, deliberate ambiguity, that feeling of psychological terror where you just can't trust the narrator, where reality itself starts to dissolve? I land on the side that the film's primary strength is its specific, concrete, thematic critique. It's rooted in social commentary.
And I'll be arguing that the deep philosophical ambiguity, that horror of the self breaking apart, that is fundamentally what Kon was trying to convey. That's the core message.
Okay, so from my perspective, the narrative structure, which is complex, right? It weaves together Mima's real life, her dreams, and that show within a show, double bind. It isn't there just to confuse us. It actually serves to highlight a really urgent critique of how the industry subjugates women. This structure makes it clear that Mima's trauma stems from these, external patriarchal forces demanding she sacrifice her innocence for her career. The film really condemns this pressure by showing the devastating consequences.
But if the message is that clear, why make it so deliberately disorienting? Why layer like that?
Because the layers are the point, in a way. They're symbolic. Think about that really notorious rape scene within the Double Bind show. It's animated quite deliberately to be repulsive, sickening, but also titillating. That's not just for shock value. It's a metacritique, right? It's looking directly at the male gaze, showing how an actress's trauma, her body, can be exploited for publicity, how the industry markets suffering. And then look at the murders that follow. The photographer, the screenwriter, they're attacked, often in the eyes or the groin. That feels like a very pointed, almost poetic irony. These are attacks on the very tools of objectification, male sight, male sexuality, that are defining her career change. It grounds a film for me in a really potent feminist reading. And you see this critique even in the costumes. Mima's initial pop idol look is all, white for purity, maybe pink, but the virtual Mima and the costume Rumi wears later, it often flashes red. Danger, maybe maturity, maybe this aggressive sexuality she's being pushed towards. That contrast, it embodies the impossible tightrope women in the public eye have to walk. Be pure and provocative, innocent and dangerous. The film meticulously shows the trauma that this impossible standard creates.
I absolutely respect that reading, especially the analysis of the symbolism, the colors, the violence. It's definitely there. But I still think the film's enduring power, what really sticks with you hinges precisely on its refusal to give us that comfort of certainty. Satoshi Kon himself, when talking about it, basically said his goal was to keep the audience guessing. He focused on the difficulty of figuring it out, not, spelling everything out clearly. For me, the horror that lingers isn't so much the external threat, the stalker. It's the profound fragility of Mima's own mind. Her complete inability at times to tell the difference between her life, her acting role as Yoko, and her dreams. Kon uses animation's flexibility brilliantly here, right? The visual language is designed to keep objective truth just perpetually out of reach. It forces us into Mima's subjective headspace. And if we just accept a simple resolution, okay, Rumi did it, case closed, we kind of flatten the film, don't we? We reduce it to a mystery plot and miss the core experience, which is being trapped in the head of the delusional person, where certainty just isn't possible. And this focus on instability, it also resonates with the time it was made. Perfect Blue came out after Japan's lost decade, right? A period of serious economic trouble, widespread social uncertainty. People felt this loss of identity, both nationally and personally. So maybe instability and psychosis aren't just tools for the social critique. Maybe they are the subject. Maybe the film is reflecting this collective feeling of disconnection, of things falling apart.
Okay, the socio-historical context is definitely relevant, I grant you that. But the film does give us an ending. It points fingers. It seems to push towards a resolution, even if it's a dark one. If the goal was pure, unending ambiguity, why explicitly link Rumi to the crimes? Why give us that?
But does the ending really offer a clean resolution? Let's look at that final scene again. Mima in the car. She looks in the rearview mirror, smiles, says, "I'm the real thing," and she drives off. But the way Khan frames it, it feels unsettling, doesn't it? That smile is ambiguous. The very need to declare herself real suggests maybe she hasn't recovered. Maybe Mima, or this Mima-Yoko blend, hasn't reached mental stability at all. Maybe she's just become completely confident in her delusion. She might have fully accepted this alternate reality as her own. It leaves the viewer with this lingering doubt, which really undermines any simple idea of her being cured.
See, I'm not entirely convinced by that reading of the final scene. I think we shouldn't prioritize that lingering feeling over the actual plot mechanics that get us there. Mima's clearest spin of mind at the end feels earned, justified even. The main sources of her extreme stress are gone, right? Rumi, the embodiment of that impossible idol image, is hospitalized. Me-Mania, the stalker, is dead. Her breakdown was triggered by these intense external pressures, these conflicting demands about her identity and value. Khan even mentioned wanting to show a young woman being reborn as a mature being after her old values get shattered. So, in a way, it's a really twisted coming-of-age story, but maybe a successful one in the end. She seems to finally accept her new identity as an actress, to find some individuality. That feels like a necessary resolution to the intense trauma she went through. That little moment of self-reassurance, she's real, it just acknowledges the depth of what she survived. It feels like her functional self managing the trauma, not succumbing to psychosis permanently. If the film wanted her to stay delusional, why neatly remove the antagonists and give her that moment of control?
Okay, that addresses the external plot points, sure, but it doesn't quite resolve the psychological tension for me. Even if the triggers are gone, the way her mind fractured, that mechanism is still there, isn't it? Let's talk about the show within the show, Double Bind. If the film's main goal is a clear thematic critique, what's the function of Double Bind beyond just moving the plot along?
Well, I see Double Bind primarily as a dramatic mirror to Mima's own life. It escalates her trauma, yes. It provides motivation for the virtual Mima persona to emerge. And crucially, it helps reveal Rumi's backstory and her motives. So it's a key part of what I see as the, maybe not simple, but straightforward plot where Rumi is the culprit. Rumi, the failed idol, can't handle Mima changing her image. The show serves that external critique by putting Mima in these exploitative situations, showing the toxic side of the industry and pushing her psychologically. Its narrative function seems pretty clear. It mirrors her trauma to force her development.
A mirror. I find that a bit reductive, honestly, especially given the title. Double Bind.
That's not just a random name, it's a specific psychological term from the 50s describing a paradoxical situation, a communicative knot, that was once thought to contribute to schizophrenia. That feels like a huge clue, pointing towards a conflict with no right answer. Mima's trapped, right? To succeed as an actress, become mature, she has to kill the idol Mima, purity, but destroying the idol Mima threatens her entire sense of self. It's a conflict she fundamentally cannot win cleanly. And the ambiguity just deepens if you consider some of the fan theories built around this, like the idea that Mima's life as an actress is actually Yoko's delusion, that Yoko, the character in Double Bind, is the rape victim who dissociates and imagines she's this actress named Mima. Suddenly, the TV show isn't just a mirror, it might be the only reality she perceives.
And Kon's editing style, those rapid, disorienting cuts between Mima's life and Yoko's story, constantly blurs the lines, visually reinforcing that ambiguity over any clear plot resolution. The filmmaking technique prioritizes making the viewer feel psychologically uncomfortable, not necessarily hammering home a social message.
But pushing the ambiguity that far, doesn't it risk undermining the very specific, very potent social commentary that the film builds so carefully? If it's all potentially just delusion, why focus so intensely on things like the internet, the fan sites, the parasocial stuff that feels so disturbingly real, especially now?
Well, the internet, Mima's room, it's introduced because it's the perfect modern tool for fracturing identity. It becomes this, breeding ground where both Mima and Mimania get obsessed with an idealized Mimo who doesn't really exist. Her identity gets literally crafted not by what she makes of herself, but of what others make of her online. She loses control of her own story and starts believing the blog. The internet, in this reading, is just the technology that enables this breakdown of a stable, objective self.
Okay, I see the power in that argument, definitely. But I think the internet's role is maybe more targeted than just general existential dread. Yes, it facilitates the identity breakdown, but it functions structurally in service of the critique. Cohen himself said he added the internet because he needed a place where a more authentic version of Mima would appear, one closer to that public image she was trying to shed. So this invention fuels the thematic critique. It provides the concrete catalyst for her paranoia. And the fear it generates is incredibly prescient, even political, right? The web isolates, it feeds the trauma cycle, and crucially, it gives the anonymity that empowers stalking and real-world harm. That parasocial link becomes a system of surveillance and threat. So the technology reinforces the film's social message. The structures of fame are inherently damaging, exploitative. It provides a concrete reason for Mima's collapse, not just an illustration of abstract uncertainty.
Perhaps. But even that powerful critique of celebrity culture loops back to the ambiguity of identity for me. Because if Mima is healed, as you suggest, why does the film still leave us wondering who is in that car? Is it Mima? Yoko? Some broken persona? The core problem remains. What happens when the public image, fueled by the web, the media, clashes so violently with the private self that it triggers psychosis? That gap, Kon himself called it tragic. Whether she's healed or consumed at the end, the mechanism of her identity fracturing feels like the central, most haunting aspect of the film. The objective truth almost feels secondary to that terrifying subjective experience of instability.
So we've explored two main readings today. Whether the film's enduring power comes from its really sharp, pointed critique of the celebrity machine, the male gaze, female trauma, all grounded in specific symbols, and leading to a kind of necessary, if dark, narrative resolution.
Or whether it stems from its deep commitment to showing the fractured experience of psychosis, that radical ambiguity, placing the viewer right inside the delusional mind, forcing us to question everything, and prioritizing that terrifying uncertainty about the self above all else.
And maybe the real brilliance of Perfect Blue lies in its ability to hold both these interpretations at the same time. The detailed thematic work, the symbols, the colors, they offer concrete meaning about the social costs involved.
Yeah, while the narrative structure, the editing, using animation's power for disorientation, those jarring cuts, ensures that objective reality is always slipping away. It traps you between that external critique and the internal psychological collapse.
It's a film that feels if anything, even more relevant now than in 1997, with the internet's role in shaping and sometimes shattering identity being so central to our lives. We definitely encourage listeners to revisit it, think about how it maps onto the complexities of the mind and public perception, and maybe find some value or perhaps necessary discomfort in the fact that there's no single easy answer.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a film that honestly feels more relevant now than ever. We're looking at Satoshi Kon's 1997 masterpiece, Perfect Blue.
It really is a powerhouse. It's not just influential anime. It's this incredibly, almost unnervingly prophetic look at fame, identity, the internet, things we grapple with constantly today.
Yeah, it really set a benchmark for psychological thrillers. And our mission really is to unpack its genius, maybe move past some of the noise that always surrounds it.
You mean the black swan noise?
Exactly. We have to start there, don't we? The whole controversy around Darren Aronofsky's film and whether it was, homage or something.
Yeah.
More.
For a lot of Kon fans, homage doesn't quite cut it. They see it as pretty blatant theft, especially given the history.
What history is that exactly?
Well, it started even before Black Swan, with Aronofsky's 2000 film, Requiem for a Dream.
Okay.
Anyone who knew Perfect Blue saw Requiem and immediately spotted it. There's this whole sequence, the bathtub scene.
Oh, the famous one, yeah.
Yeah, where the main character is breaking down, sinks into the tub. Aronofsky lifted that shot for shot, framing it all directly from Perfect Blue. It wasn't subtle.
Wow, okay. So that context makes the Black Swan similarities feel different, less coincidental.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it apparently really stung Kon himself. There are accounts, sources mention this, about Aronofsky supposedly trying to buy the rights to do a live-action Perfect Blue around 2001.
Really? Did that ever happen?
Nope, never materialized. But Kon heard about it and later reflected on the whole situation. And his words are they're kind of heartbreaking.
What does she say?
He said, I'm feeling pathetic. It's a pitiful tale when the person being paid homage to has less name recognition, less social credibility, and less budget to spend.
Oof. That hits hard. It really speaks to that power imbalance, doesn't it?
Completely.
Yeah.
It highlights this cultural disparity. Kon knew his work was being borrowed from by a much larger, wealthier Hollywood system that often wouldn't even give credit where it was due.
And it wasn't just about Black Swan then. It was a bigger feeling of being overlooked on the world stage.
Yeah, I think so. And that's why we want to do this deep dive today, to really focus on the film itself, the thinking behind it, because it was genuinely revolutionary.
And it's wild to think it started small, right? It wasn't meant to be this big festival hit.
Not at all. It was originally intended for the V-cinema market in Japan, straight to video, lower budget. Kon himself was apparently quite surprised, maybe even a bit perplexed, when it took off at international film festivals.
Like he accidentally tapped into something universal before everyone else was really talking about it.
Exactly. He was articulating anxieties about identity, media, the digital world, anxieties that were just starting to bubble up globally.
Okay, so let's get into those specifics. Part 1, the weight of influence and the cost of recognition. Beyond that bathtub scene, how deep do the Black Swan parallels run?
Oh, they run deep. The basic narrative structure, it's practically identical.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So, Perfect Blue, you've got Mima. She's a pop idol, part of a girl group, very clean image. She decides to leave music and become a serious actress.
Right, trying to shed that pure persona.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the stress of that transition, the pressure, the darker role she takes, it causes her to lose her grip on reality. She starts having delusions, seeing a version of her old idol self, questioning who she really is.
Okay, got it. And Black Swan?
Black Swan. You have Nina, a technically skilled but emotionally repressed ballerina. She desperately wants the lead role in Swan Lake, which requires her to embody both the innocent white swan and the sensual dark black swan.
The duality again.
Right. And her obsessive pursuit of that perfection, trying to access that darker side, sends her spiraling into delusion. She hallucinates, becomes paranoid, can't tell her art from her life, her rivals, from her own projections.
Wow. Okay, yeah, the blueprint is strikingly similar.
It is. Even the names Mima and Nina, they just sound alike, don't they? Some sources even suggest Nina's whole ballet environment might be a nod to Mima's final pop idol costume, which had this very ballerina-like feel.
Huh. Interesting detail. But back to that bathtub scene for a second. Why is that the one everyone latches onto?
Well, visually, it's just incredibly potent. Mima's in the bath, trying to scrub away the figurative dirt of her new acting roles, the compromising things she's done.
Like she's trying to wash away the guilt or the trauma.
Exactly. But the water gets murky, or she hallucinates something disturbing. It symbolizes that the corruption isn't external, it's internal now. It's inside her head.
And it's shot so memorably.
It is. So when Aronofsky used that exact visual metaphor, that same staging, for Nina's breakdown in Black Swan, well, for people who knew Perfect Blue, it felt less like inspiration and more like just taking it.
Yeah, I can see why that would feel like crossing a line.
And then you layer on the cultural context we talked about. You have this brilliant, complex, animated film from Japan dealing with really adult themes.
Psychosis, trauma, the pressures on women.
Right, heavy stuff. But because it's animation, it gets sidelined, often dismissed in the West as maybe just for kids or at least niche.
While the big-budget, star-studded American live-action version gets Oscar buzz and is hailed as high art.
Precisely. It feels like the original pioneering work gets overshadowed because the repackaged version fits more neatly into the established Hollywood hierarchy. It popularizes the ideas, but erases the source.
And this wasn't an isolated incident with Kon's work you mentioned. There were similar whispers about Inception.
Yeah, Christopher Nolan's Inception came out in 2010. Kon's film Paprika, which deals directly with technology used to enter and navigate people's dreams, came out in 2007.
Ah, okay. That premise is pretty close.
It is. Now, the connection there is more debated. Some argue Inception is its own thing, but visually, the way dreams fracture, the shifting realities, reflections shattering, a lot of the language of Inception feels very indebted to Paprika.
So whether you call it homage or something else, the pattern is there. Kon's ideas kept popping up in major Hollywood thrillers.
Absolutely. You look at his key films from that era, Perfect Blue, Millennium Actress, Paprika. They were ground zero for so many techniques we now associate with modern psychological thrillers. The unreliable narrator, the layers of reality, questioning what's real.
He was teaching audiences how to watch those kinds of movies before they became mainstream hits here.
You could definitely argue that. He laid a lot of the groundwork. And understanding that context, that often unacknowledged influence, is key to appreciating just how ahead of its time Perfect Blue really was.
Okay, let's pivot then. If his visuals influenced Hollywood's style, his use of the internet in Perfect Blue feels like it predicted the substance of our modern anxieties. Part 2. The digital prison.
This part is genuinely uncanny. It's maybe the most prophetic aspect of the film. You have to remember the source material again.
The original novel from '91.
Right. Perfect Blue. Complete metamorphosis.
Yeah.
It was basically a stalker story. The internet wasn't really a factor back then, not in the same way.
So Kon and his screenwriter added that whole layer?
They did. Sadayuki Murai, the screenwriter, worked with Kon to deliberately update the story for what they called the new digitally connected world, which is amazing because Kon apparently admitted he knew nothing about computers.
He had to buy one just to research for the film.
That's the story. He had to study up on this newfangled internet thing to make the plot work. And the centerpiece they created was this website, Mima's Room.
Right, the blog. Tell us about that.
Mima's Room is presented as Mima's own online diary. It documents her life in excruciatingly personal detail, her thoughts, feelings, what she had for breakfast, where she went shopping, private conversations.
Super intimate stuff.
Exactly. And Mima finds this site, reads it, and is utterly terrified because it's so accurate, down to things only she should know.
So she thinks she must be writing it herself during blackouts or something.
That's her fear, that she's losing time, dissociating, and this blog is proof, but here's the chilling twist the sources point out.
She's not writing it.
Not at all. Mima's Room is a complete fabrication. It's created by two other characters working together. Her obsessive stalker, who calls himself Me-Mania, and her own manager, Rumi.
Wait, her manager, why?
Rumi is deeply disturbed by Mima leaving the pop idol world. She wants the old, pure Mima back. So she feeds incredibly detailed private information about Mima's daily life to Me-Mania.
Who then posts it on the blog, crafting this online persona.
Exactly. Crafting a version of Mima that aligns with Rumi's idealized image. The innocent pop star who would never do these dirty acting roles. It's this perfect storm of obsession and manipulation, mediated entirely through the web.
That is terrifying. It's like a blueprint for catfishing, identity theft, online harassment, all the way back in 1997.
It's absolutely prescient. It shows how the anonymity of the internet could empower someone like Me-Mania, letting him lurk behind his screen and construct a false reality that directly impacts Mima's mental state.
And Mima starts to believe it.
Well, she's already fragile, right? Her sense of self is crumbling. She sees this detailed, seemingly authentic account of her life online, and in her confusion and desperation, she starts to almost defer to it, as if the blog knows her better than she knows herself.
Her identity gets completely outsourced to this digital fake. Wow.
It's the ultimate violation of privacy and autonomy. And what's really fascinating is how Mima and Mimania use the same website for completely opposite reasons. They're like mirror images of delusion.
How so?
Mima reads Mima's room, desperately searching for flaws. She looks for tiny factual errors. Maybe the blog mentions the wrong brand of milk she bought, or misquotes a private thought.
She's trying to prove it's not her, that it's fake, trying to find an anchor to her real self.
Exactly. She's using the digital record to try and reclaim her sanity. Mimania, on the other hand, he ignores all those small details. He only cares about the big picture presented by the blog, that the Mima who became an actress is an imposter.
And the Mima on the website, the pure idol Mima, is the real one who needs protecting.
Right. He uses the exact same information, not to find truth, but to confirm the distorted belief he already holds.
That sounds incredibly familiar, like how people use social media today to find validation for their existing biases, ignoring anything that contradicts them.
It's the filter bubble effect, the echo chamber, predicted decades ago. Kon totally nailed that dynamic, and he clearly thought deeply about the internet's psychological impact.
You mentioned he had a quote about it later.
Yeah, in 2006, long after the film, he said something really insightful. Don't you think dreams and the internet are similar? They're both areas where the repressed conscious mind vents.
Whoa, linking the subconscious, uncontrolled space of dreams with the anonymous, often uncontrolled space of the web.
It's a powerful connection. Our hidden desires, fears, aggressions, they find an outlet in both places.
Did he elaborate on that?
He did. He also talked about how the constant stream of images, online ads, propaganda, maybe even just repetitive content about someone like Mima, combined with things like stolen data, could lead to a kind of rewriting of our own minds.
Rewriting our minds. How?
He linked it to digital terrorism. It sounds dramatic, but think about it today. Deepfakes twisting reality, targeted disinformation campaigns, algorithmic shaping of narratives.
Our perception of reality is constantly being manipulated by external digital input.
Exactly. Kon saw the vulnerability of the individual mind in the face of this overwhelming digital flow. Perfect Blue isn't just about one stalker. It's about the fundamental fragility of identity in a world saturated by manufactured online realities.
Okay, so the internet is the external force messing with her head. Let's go internal now. The film itself points to a specific psychological concept, right? The double bind, part 3. Identity, psychosis, and the horror of the double bind.
Yes, and this is where the film's real horror engine lies. It's not jump scares. The terror comes from being trapped inside Mima's perspective, sharing her confusion.
You literally can't tell what's real.
You can't. And Kon masterfully uses the medium of animation and editing to achieve this. He just seamlessly blends Mima's everyday life, her nightmares, her hallucinations.
And scenes from the TV show she's filming.
Right. The show within the show, which is crucially named Double Bind. This constant intercutting completely destabilizes the viewer.
There's that famous technique he uses, the repetitive waking up.
Oh yeah, it's brilliant. You see something traumatic happen, Mima jolts awake. Okay, it was a dream. But then, boom, she jolts awake again, seemingly from the same dream. Or maybe the first waking was the dream. It's this hallucinatory repetitiveness, as one source calls it.
Your ability to trust what you're seeing just evaporates.
Completely. It's pure disorientation, which perfectly sets up the psychological concept the film leans on. The double bind.
Explain that. What is a double bind, psychologically speaking?
It's a communication paradox. Basically, a situation where a person receives two conflicting messages, often simultaneously, like maybe the words say one thing, but the tone or body language says the opposite.
And no matter what they do in response, they're wrong.
Exactly. They're punished if they follow message A and punished if they follow message B. There's no escape, no right choice. It's a classic no-win scenario that creates intense anxiety and confusion.
Like the example of a parent demanding closeness, but then rejecting the child when they approach?
That's a classic textbook example. The child is trapped.
Yeah.
Come here, but also go away. Psychologically, that's incredibly damaging.
And this concept was historically linked to some serious mental health issues.
Yeah, researchers back in the day explored connections between persistent double binds in family dynamics and conditions like schizophrenia or PTSD. The idea was that constant contradiction could contribute to a fragmentation of self.
Okay, so how does this apply directly to Mima?
Her entire life becomes a double bind. She's caught between these irreconcilable demands and identities.
The pure pop idol versus the serious, maybe tarnished actress.
Right. If she embraces the acting career, she betrays her innocent past, angering her old fans and activating this guilt represented by her hallucinatory double. But if she tries to cling to the idol persona, she's denying her own growth, her ambitions, and likely failing in her new career.
She can't win. Whatever choice she makes is wrong according to someone or some part of herself.
Precisely. She loses her core sense of self because she's constantly trying and failing to navigate these contradictions imposed on her by the industry, her fans, her manager, and her own fractured psyche.
Which explains why the ending is so debated.
Absolutely. Because Kon wants you to be unsure. He masterfully blurred the line so much that multiple interpretations of what really happened feel plausible. He even said the difficulty in figuring it out is the point.
So let's talk about the main fan theories. What's the most straightforward reading? Reality #1.
Reality #1, the straightforward plot, is probably what most people think on a first watch. In this version, Mima's manager, Rumi, is the main villain.
Rumi, not the stalker. Me-mania.
Rumi is the mastermind. She's suffering from dissociative identity disorder, believing she is the real pure Mima. She's the one orchestrating things, manipulating Mimania to carry out the attacks.
Okay, and in this ending?
Mima eventually confronts and overcomes Rumi. Rumi gets institutionalized, Mimania is dealt with, and Mima emerges traumatized, but ultimately successful and seemingly stable in her acting career.
Okay, that makes sense. But then there's reality #2. The really dark one.
Yeah, reality #2, the delusion plot. This one reframes everything. It suggests that the TV show Mima is acting in, Double Bind. That's actually the true reality?
Wait, so the crime drama is real life?
In this theory, yes. Mima isn't Mima. She's Yoko, the character she plays in Double Bind, a character who, within the show, has suffered severe trauma and ended up institutionalized.
So the entire story, we've watched Mima, the pop star, the acting career, the stalker, all of that is...
Just Yoko's elaborate delusion, a fantasy life she's constructed from inside a mental hospital to cope with her real trauma.
Whoa, okay, that changes everything, especially her final line in the film.
Right. At the very end, Mima looks in the mirror, smiles, and says confidently, "I'm real."
In reality, #1, that's a statement of triumph, for she's found herself.
But in reality, #2, it's the most tragic line imaginable.
Yeah.
It means Yoko has fully succumbed to the delusion. She's achieved stability, not by healing, but by completely detaching from reality and embracing the manufactured identity of the successful actress Mima.
So she's stable, but only because she's confidently insane.
That's the chilling implication. And Kon deliberately never gave a definitive answer. He loves the ambiguity. He said something like, "So long as you accept that it's meant to be inexplicable, that's fine."
He even hinted that Mima's final line might suggest lingering problems.
Exactly. That maybe she isn't fully okay. That doubt, the possibility she is still Yoko, trapped in that delusion.
Yeah.
That's the lingering horror Kon leaves you with.
Which brings us to another layer. The film as a critique of the industry itself, especially how it treats women. Part 4. Critique of the idol system and female exploitation.
Yeah, you absolutely cannot separate Mima's psychological breakdown from the specific pressures of the Japanese idol industry she's trying to escape. The film is a scathing commentary on that system.
Set the scene for us. What's the context of idol culture in Japan, especially then?
Well, particularly for female idols, there's this intense emphasis on youth, purity, approachability, almost a kind of manufactured innocence. And there's traditionally been a very short shelf life.
Like they age out really young.
Often, yeah. The perception was, and sometimes still is, that idols lose their freshness by their mid-20s. So Mima making this career change at 21 is actually framed as quite early, almost desperate, driven by this industry logic that discards women once they're no longer seen as perfectly young and pure.
And her decision to become an actress? It wasn't really her decision, was it?
Not really, no. The film makes it clear. When asked why she wants to act, Mima doesn't have her own reasons. She just repeats the justifications given to her by the men controlling her career, primarily Tadokoro, her agent.
So her agency is completely stripped away. Her career path, the roles she takes, even the way her image is changed, it's all dictated by men for their own benefit.
It's a stark depiction of how the male-dominated entertainment industry can control and exploit female performers. And this exploitation reaches its absolute peak in that infamous scene.
The rape scene she has to film for Double Bind?
Exactly. It's incredibly uncomfortable to watch, and it's meant to be. Tadokoro basically bullies her into it. He uses this cynical logic, comparing it to Jodie Foster in The Accused, saying it could be good for her career.
Even though Mima is clearly distressed by the idea.
Deeply. but she feels trapped. She agrees out of fear of losing this new career path, and Kon shoots the scene in a way that's deliberately brutal, graphic. He called it simultaneously sickening and titillating.
Why titillating? That sounds problematic.
He's critiquing the audience, the male gaze. He's forcing viewers to confront the voyeuristic, exploitative nature of how female trauma is often depicted and consumed in media. It's meant to make you question your own reaction.
And for Mima, the line between simulated and real trauma just dissolves.
Completely.
Yeah.
She's coerced into performing a sexual act under the duress of potential career ruin. Afterward, she exhibits genuine trauma responses. It's a violation, regardless whether it's just acting.
And this is the turning point for her hallucinations, right?
It's the major trigger. Right after filming that scene, the virtual Mima, her pop idol ghost, clad in that pink costume, starts appearing, haunting her, accusing her of being dirty, tarnished, an imposter.
The guilt and the trauma manifest as this spectral double.
Exactly. And this tension between the demanded purity and the forced sexualization continues in the next sequence, the nude photo shoot.
Yeah, right. Tell us about the symbolism there.
Mima poses nude, but on this stark white bed, surrounded by white backdrops. White, especially in Japanese culture and Shinto tradition, strongly symbolizes purity, the feminine.
So there's that visual marker of innocence.
But then the photographer directs her to use the white sheets to cover her genitals, maintaining a veneer of that purity, while simultaneously framing her body for maximum sexual exploitation in the photos.
It's the double bind again, visually. Be pure, but also be sexually available and exploitable.
Perfectly put. It's the impossible, contradictory standard women are held to, crystallized in one image.
And the film takes this feminist critique even further with the murders, doesn't it? The victims are symbolic.
Highly symbolic. The men who get killed are the ones directly responsible for Mima's sexual exploitation and objectification.
The screenwriter who wrote the rape scene?
Yes, the one who specifically leveraged her past career for titillation, he's found with his eyes gouged out.
A literal attack on the male gaze, blinding the one who objectified her.
Exactly. It's incredibly direct symbolism. And then the photographer, Murano, who shot the nude photos.
What happens to him?
He's stabbed viciously, not just in the eye, but significantly, also in the groin.
Wow.
Sources read this as a literal attack on male sexuality. It's a violent emasculation of the man whose power and masculinity were reinforced by exploiting women's bodies. It flips the power dynamic in the most brutal way.
So the violence isn't random. It's a direct symbolic retribution against the mechanisms of female exploitation within the story.
Precisely. It elevates the film beyond just a psychological thriller into a really potent piece of feminist commentary.
Let's talk about the style itself. Why animation? Why was that the right choice for Kon? Part 5. Cinematic style and historical context.
I think for Kon, animation offered a level of control and visual freedom that live action, especially on that budget, just couldn't provide.
Control over what, specifically?
Over everything in the frame. The composition, the pacing of visual metaphors. Think about those seamless transitions between reality, dreams, memories, the TV show. Animation allows you to blend those layers instantly, fluidly, in a way that feels completely subjective.
I think you're literally seeing the inside of her head.
Exactly. He perfected this even further in films like Millennium Actress, blurring past and present. Kon himself said something like, in animation, only what is intended to be communicated is there. There's no accidental clutter. Every visual element serves the psychological purpose.
He could make reality shatter visually, instantly.
Right, and do it with a precision and speed that live-action editing often struggles to match. It's the ideal medium for portraying a fractured consciousness.
And his character designs were also a very specific choice, weren't they? He avoided the typical anime look.
He did, very deliberately. He went for designs that are almost mundane, realistic. Even Mima, the pop star, looks relatively normal, relatable.
Why is that important?
It grounds the story. It makes Mima feel like a real person, not a stylized archetype. It reinforces the idea that these issues, mental illness, identity crisis, exploitation, aren't just happening in some fantasy world. They happen to people who look like us. It makes the horror feel closer, more universal.
That's a great point. And he used color very intentionally too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Color theory is doing a lot of work in Perfect Blue. Red is the obvious one.
Danger signal.
Yeah, omen of danger, violence, often associated with the murders, a masculine threat.
But the really interesting one is the pink crimson.
Yes. Virtual Mima, the ghost idol, wears that signature pink costume. Pink is literally white, purity mixed with red, passion, danger.
So her costume embodies that impossible dichotomy she's supposed to represent.
Exactly. That blend of sexual innocence and passion that the idol industry demands, it's visually coded right onto her hallucination.
And then at the climax, the color shifts.
It deepens. When the real threat is revealed Rumi in her full delusion, she appears wearing a new idol outfit, but this one is described as deep crimson.
From pink suggestion to overt red danger.
Precisely. The color signals the shift from internal psychological conflict to immediate deadly physical threat. The ambiguity resolves into violence, visually represented by that crimson.
Finally, we need to connect all this back to the specific time and place. Japan in the late 90s. How does that context shape the film?
It's crucial. Japan was going through its lost decade then. The economic bubble had burst, leading to stagnation, recession, a real sense of national uncertainty and anxiety.
A kind of collective identity crisis.
Very much so. There was widespread dissatisfaction, a feeling of drift. And this period also saw a significant rise in social isolation.
The hikikomori phenomenon.
Yeah, the emergence of young people, mostly men initially, withdrawing completely from society, shutting themselves in their rooms, often interacting only via the nascent internet.
And Perfect Blue reflects this mood.
Deeply. Mima's personal identity crisis, her feelings of isolation and dread, mirrors that broader societal anxiety. And the character of Mimania, the stalker hiding in his apartment, obsessed, communicating anonymously online. He's almost a perfect embodiment of the fears surrounding the hikikomori archetype and the potential dangers of that withdrawal, combined with digital anonymity.
The film was tapping into a real social unease.
And sadly, it foreshadowed something darker, too. That general sense of despair and chaos in the late 90s preceded a really tragic spike in suicide rates in Japan, starting around 1998.
Wow.
For over a decade after that, the numbers were alarmingly high. So the film's focus on mental breakdown, identity loss, and despair wasn't just internal. It was reflecting, and maybe even anticipating, a very real societal trauma that was unfolding.
That adds another layer of weight to it. Okay, let's wrap this up. Outro. Final takeaways and provocation.
When you put all these pieces together, the critique of fame, the prophetic internet, the deep dive into psychosis, the feminist reading, the historical context, the stylistic innovation, Perfect Blue, stands as just this incredibly dense, powerful piece of work.
And its themes haven't aged at all. If anything, they feel sharper now. Fame, online identity, privacy, exploitation. These are our daily battles.
Absolutely. It was cinematic prophecy in so many ways.
And thinking back on Mima's journey, we noted that her drive to become an actress wasn't really internal. It was about fulfilling external expectations. Her agent, the industry.
She was performing the role of ambitious actress before she even got the parts.
Which leads us to that final unsettling question, especially if you entertain that delusion plot theory.
Reality #2, where her success is all in her head.
Right. If achieving stability, achieving that final I'm real confidence actually means fully embracing a delusion, detaching completely from a traumatic reality, and living inside a convincing performance, what does that say about the price of feeling okay?
Did Mima actually overcome her demons? Or did she just trade one performance, the pop idol, for a more socially acceptable, maybe even more successful performance, the stable actress that happens to be a complete fiction?
It makes you think. Which version of yourself do you rely on more? Is it the authentic, private self, the one with all the doubts and messiness?
Or is it the curated, performed self you present to the world, the successful, confident one? And which of those ultimately defines your sense of what's real?
A challenging thought to end on. Definitely something to mull over.
Indeed.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.